Good morning. We are live. Let's see. And Tora has decided to come visit today. Come here, you. Say hi to your fans. Oh, she's such a good girl. Such a pretty little kitty cat, aren't you? Oh, such a sweetie pie. Yeah, say hi to your fans. Say meow. Good girl. Okay, you can hop down. Mm. Oh, and what's in my mouth? Well, I searched everywhere for Smarties and found the giant ones. They're supposed to be little tiny things, but I guess all they make now are these big ones the size of sweet tarts. Not quite as tart as sweet tarts, just pleasant. Mmm, yeah. Well, I'm anxious to get back to painting my kitchen and demolishing weeds all over my yard. The weeds are an important thing to take care of since we're always in fire danger over the summer here in the mountains. It's satisfying to feel the roots let go when you pull a weed, but I have so many of them, it's really overwhelming. My yard is about 100 feet by 45 feet. It's huge. Mm, let's see. I'm pretty sure the fire department would not let my house get destroyed in a fire because right behind my back fence is the gas station where they get their fuel. Plus, they don't like to see a gas station burn. All that gasoline and diesel burns like crazy and pollutes the air. But just the same, I need to get rid of the rest of the weeds, and I will be hauling out a weed whacker. They come back faster when you just whack them, and the roots are left behind. But you do sometimes you do what you gotta do. I've been avoiding my favorite conspiracy theory um, mostly YouTube podcasts and watching British murder mysteries. Sometimes Poirot, sometimes Miss Marple, Midsummer Murders, A Touch of Frost, and the local one set in Los Angeles and produced by some graduates of my old alma mater, Chapman College, which is now Chapman University. Whoopee. Bosch, Bosch. It's a good show. I'm not sure about season 4. It didn't really hook me in on the first 2 episodes. Let's see, what else have I watched? Oh, Inspector Morse, and even the spin-off Inspector. Oh, I can't remember his sidekick's name. Oh well. Let's see. Inspector Morse spin-off. Inspector Lewis, Lewis. Okay, well, this morning I watched Robert Phoenix because I like him, I like his show. I'm not into astrology, and he is an astrologer, but he does other stuff. Anyway, he was getting into the Black Lives Matter and playing clips of the black people, mostly men, black men who are not happy with Black Lives Matter. Well, first you need to know that I'm not white, I'm a fair-skinned black. Grandpa was passing for white, and everybody knew it. Dad pretty much was white to look at, but his dad was, well, I'd say half black, except Dad's grandpa was only half black, so I guess he was a quarter black. Anyway, uh, Dad knew that his grandpa was black. He visited him over the summer many times when he was growing up. Never told us. So, anyway, by most definitions, I'm a fair skinned black. No one told me. My older and smarter brother dug it up while working on our genealogy. We couldn't find a record of our grandfather, or great grandfather, I guess, because our family gave us a wrong name to hide him from us because he was buried on the black side of the segregated cemetery in Los Angeles. Uh, and then we thought that must be a mistake, but then my brother was contacted by some cousins in Texas who are most definitely black. You see, great grandpa was a philanderer. He got around, married some of his wives. This would have been just before and after the turn of the 20th century, 1900. It is Tuesday, isn't it, Oswald? Oh, test day. Okay, I get it. Let's see. I'm learning how to do the emojis in these chat rooms. If only all chat rooms worked the same when it comes to emojis. I have to remember which one I'm in and how you do a thumbs up. So, anyway, yes, Black Lives Matter. But why do people get their panties in a knot over Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter? Why does that make me a racist if I support law enforcement or everybody's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And who is the idiot who decided to take down the statue? I'm going to check the name. think I know it. Yes, of Frederick Douglass, an American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. After escaping from slavery in Maryland, he became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, gaining note for his oratory and incisive anti slavery writings. And yes, I read something of his that was assigned in school, and I was impressed. Well, some idiots decided they should take down his statue on the 4th of July. They just want to take down everything. They don't care what it is. They don't. They don't care what the truth is. They have their own truth. And it doesn't matter whether it's real, it's what they believe. And if you disagree, you're a racist and stupid. They burned down a statue of an elk in Portland. It must have been a wooden statue. No, they just want to tear everything down, but they don't want to build anything. Look at that horrible thing in Seattle where Black Lives Matter took over 3 blocks of downtown, terrified the residents. The police were not allowed to go in. Paramedics were and firefighters were not allowed to go in. If you needed an ambulance, somebody had to take you outside of the barricades because the ambulance was not allowed in. And what happened? Well, finally, when they started killing each other, the mayor decided the police could go in and clear out that 3 block area. And then they had to have people in hazmat suits cleaning up the mess. Yeah, the autonomous zone. The security people were shooting children. And then in Georgia, in I believe it was Atlanta, but I know it was the state of Georgia. Finally, after an 8-year-old black girl was shot to death and her father went on the news and the internet scolding the Black Lives Matter people for shooting their own. Finally, the governor of Georgia called in the National Guard to put a stop to it. I am all for peaceful demonstrations. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my heroes. I am not for this kind of mayhem, whether it's the left or the right or the anarchists or whoever. If you need a gun to get your point across, there's something wrong with this world. Or any weapon. And I can't help but think that it's staged by someone who wants to divide and conquer. As long as we're divided in the black community, the white community, the Hispanic community, the Jewish community, the Christian community, the Mormon community. Well, I, sorry, it's chilly in these here parts. I kind of want to divide the Scientology community, but that's another story. We're all Americans, and none of us can change the color of our skin. Many of us cannot change our religion. Can't do it. just like the Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity in Spain around the time of Columbus, 1400s. They were what they called crypto Jews, outwardly converted to Christianity, but inwardly still worshiping the God of Israel and not Jesus. Well, yeah, of course, Dr. King was a devout Christian. He was a preacher. Right, Oswald, you're very intelligent and well educated. As far as Confederate heroes and slave owners, if you forget that history, you're bound to repeat it. Now, maybe it won't be black Africans pushed into slavery. I have a feeling it'll be all of us eventually. The empire never ended. Basically, illegal immigrants are slaves because they don't dare go to the police because they're here illegally. And that's not just Hispanics, it isn't just Mexicans or South Americans. There's still Chinese slaves. They work for a restaurant quite often, sleep on a mat on the floor, barely get enough to eat, and never really get paid. It happens all the time. Yeah, Somalis, lots of people from around the world. Lots of Filipinos and Indonesians are in slavery in our ally, Saudi Arabia. And in that country, they can legally kill their slaves. Slaves have no status. And if you look at the laws of the Confederate South regarding slavery, the plantations where things were the worst were breaking the law. And if the authorities in the South had um, done their job, conditions would not have been that bad. And on top of that, some free black people owned slaves, and slaves had certain days off when they could work for money and buy their freedom. If they could come up with the price that the plantation owner had paid for them when they were brought over in the bowels of a ship from Africa, they could buy their freedom. And they would have papers to prove their freedom. And that's why my grandmother's grandmother risked prison for teaching her slaves to read and write, because having papers didn't do you much good if you couldn't read them. So before setting them free, she taught them to read and write. I believe this was in Maryland, but I'm not really sure. It could have been Virginia. Anyway, she taught them to read and write and then set them free. Slavery, at least at that time, was actually a losing proposition. It wasn't profitable to have slaves. Plantations lost money. And the war was not about slavery anyway, it was a tax revolt. And count 'em, 4 northern states were allowed to keep their slaves under the celebrated Emancipation Proclamation. Really, one of them was Maryland. I forget the other 3, but 4 northern states had slaves. The war was a tax revolt, and it did result in freeing the black African slaves, but guess what? It didn't free the Irish. The England was oppressing the Irish so badly. The famine was made worse by English policies that Irish were forced to sell either themselves or their children into slavery. And they came to the New World in the bowels of ships that were no better than the ships from Africa. They were sold as slaves, and they were still slaves after the Civil War. And there were Chinese slaves working on the railways, the great intercontinental railway, which was built to a large extent by freed black Africans and Irish slaves and Chinese slaves. So it isn't simply a black issue, it's a human issue. Slavery is wrong, no doubt about it. Even in the much maligned Old Testament, where it talks about, actually, it talks about servants. The Romans had slaves, they owned slaves for life. The Jews had indentured servants. There was a time limit, usually to repay a debt. A poor person would fall into debt, be unable to pay, and someone who could afford it would pay off the debt, and then the debtor would work off the debt as a servant or slave to the person who got him out of debt. And the children of those slaves were not automatic slaves, by the way. Remember when Abraham and Sarah couldn't have a child? What did Abraham tell God? He didn't want a servant in his house to inherit everything. Some slavery, you get to inherit the wealth of your owner. That's not slavery as we know it. Well, we know that Abraham had 2 children, and that has caused all kinds of warfare and other conflict down through history. Ishmael and Isaac. All kinds of conflict came from that. So, anyway, we need to free everyone. So, yes, all lives matter. And it isn't a privilege just because someone who appears to be white can walk down the street and not have his rights violated. And by the way, it's usually a man or a blonde. blue-eyed blonde woman. Just because their rights are not violated doesn't mean that they're privileged. It means the people who have their rights violated are oppressed. And yes, Black people are still oppressed. I noticed when I was teaching on military bases in the Southland, at the time, African Americans, blacks, or whatever term you want to use, were about 10% of the total population. But they were nearly half of the military population. Our volunteer army. You know why, don't you? Black people, especially black men, could not get a decent job. And this the 1990s. They couldn't get a good education. They would join the military. They would take college courses while in the military so they could get promoted, get better housing, better pay, and so forth. It was one of the very few, and it really was rampant civil rights and a to tell you about that act in 64 or 65 in memory of JFK, Kennedy, the guy they shot. Well, guess what? That was not the first Civil Rights Act. The first one was in 1957 under President Eisenhower, a Republican. And let's see, it was proposed by Eisenhower because various laws, especially in southern states with Democratic politicians running things, Black people were being deprived of their right to vote by various stupid laws. I'm sorry the connection is stuttering. Of course, the connection is stuttering. I'm talking about politics again. Well, you see, stupid laws like a poll tax where you had to pay money to cast your vote, or you had to be able to read and write. Well, yeah, under segregation, which was still happening then, Black children were not taught very well. And yes, they could read and write the school books, but they'd be handed something with great big words and uh, Gothic lettering, something that was not familiar to them. They and by the way, the voting age then was 21. They'd turn 21 and be, you know, literate enough, but not to read the stuff that they were tested on. Okay, 1957. Eisenhower proposed the Civil Rights Bill while he was actually campaigning in 1956, running for re-election. And it passed in 1957. The Congress uh, wrote it up and passed it, and he signed it. And let's see. Okay. Now things have kind of flip-flopped lately. Oh, the poll tax, you got to pay money to vote. The reading test, they come up with something that even I might have trouble reading. I might stumble on the pronunciation of some of the words. You know, those $5, oh, I'm an academic writing for a peer reviewed journal, those words. hmm And I taught English. Well, let's move on to one of my pet peeves. The climate might be climactic in the sense that the end is coming, but wind and weather and rain and snow and all that stuff is climatic. No k in there in the middle. If it's climactic, it's approaching the climax. Oh, hi, Sleepy. Climactic is related to the word climax. Okay, climatic equals related to the climate, weather, and so forth. Mm-hmm. Please learn those two words if you happen to be a highly paid professional broadcaster. Please. That's one of the things that drive me nuts. Now, I know people who can't stand it when someone says ax and they mean ask. Doesn't bother me at all. I consider that a regional accent. No problem. But when you're on the radio or the television and you're paid to read a script on the air, please. And the other one I hate is might have, is not, may of. One of the worst examples I can think of, it's not that exact phrase, but it's similar. Yes, I binge watched the OJ trial in the 90s. This attorney for Los Angeles, a deputy DA, I guess, a woman whose name I've gratefully forgotten, gets up to explain why it would it wasn't wrong of them to conceal some document or something like that. Now, what she wanted to say is, if we were up to something, we would not have done this. And the key phrase is would not have. You'll never guess what she said. Poor Sleepy. He's really sleepy today, hasn't been able to sleep. She said, instead of would not have, she said, wouldn't of. I'm I'm not quite as bothered by because. Now I'm lazy, I say because, knowing full well that it's really because. But I don't say because. That's just stupid. And TO does not spell duh. I don't want to go duh the store. Duh the is supposed to be to the. Makes me crazy. I already have a crazy eye. It wanders off because it's partially blind. I can see better when it wanders off than when it's looking straight ahead. When I close the other eye, there's just this blind spot. So my eye moves around to compensate. Could've, would've, should've. Yeah, now if you spelled them right, like apostrophe VE, could've, would've, should've, they aren't of. But I know these people are saying OF of. Oh, I can't stick around too much longer. I gotta watch paint dry, and I don't find that boring. No, I have to finish painting a wall, and then I have to pull some more weeds and do a load of laundry. Someday I'll have my kitchen back in working order. I'm waiting for another cabinet. There's a big blank spot where a cabinet will go. Spackling, well, I've been cussing out someone because I had to waste an entire day repairing the damage to my floor because he ripped off the old tiles when I told him not to. And he didn't even try to preserve them in good condition, he just ripped them all apart and tossed them in the trash. Well, it was several weeks before I was ready to lay down new tiles. And in the meantime, the bare compressed wood floor, I thought it was 2 feet square. It's more like 3 feet square. It got walked on constantly by people and critters because I was not ready to lay down new floor tiles. There were gaps and holes already. No, it wasn't Walter Bosley, LOL. It was an anonymous handyman. I'm going to rip him a new one next time he starts doing something like that. Anyway, when he did it so he could paint it with primer. That's what you do before you lay down tiles. Well, do you know what happens to a compressed wood board when people walk all over it? Chunks of the wood come out, creating new holes for me to spackle. And the primer gets filthy dirty, and tiles don't stick to dirt, so it has to be cleaned and primed again. By the way, he didn't clean it before he painted it with primer. I swept it, but anyway. And I couldn't do any of that until after I filled in the holes and gaps that already existed because the floor was built by idiots in the first place. And I had to paint a certain wall first before doing anything else. I had to clean the wall, prime it, and paint it in 2 coats because that wall had to be done before we brought the stove back into my kitchen. And I really wanted to be able to boil water or fry a hot dog. The oven doesn't work, but that stove will be replaced eventually with a new used stove. So here it is, several weeks, I think 2 weeks later. I finally filling in the holes is a slow process. You put in a little bit of caulking, you let that dry before you add more. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a gooey mess instead of a nice patch. And then you top it off with spackle because tile doesn't stick to caulking very easily. Trust me, vinyl tiles with the gluey backing, they don't stick to that. They'll stick to spackle. And then, after about a week of filling in gaps and holes, first with caulk, then with spackle, sanding the surface. Then I spackled the holes in the wood. And when that dried, I got to get the primer and paint it again. And when everything was good and dry, I got to lay down the new tiles. And the floor is not level, and I knew that. But I had planned to use the old tile underneath it to bring that section of the floor up level with the rest of the floor. Couldn't do that. Some asshole ripped them out, tore them to shreds, and put them in the trash. So, I just laid down the new tile. And of course, it is not level, it's weird looking, but if that asshole thinks he's going to remove them, he's got another think coming. I'm going to put a layer of indoor-outdoor carpet tiles over that. And that will bring the floor up to level. And nobody will ever know, except me. Well, someone presuming that he knows better what to do with my things than I do is something to cuss about. And actually, that's profanity. When I ban cussing, I don't ban ass. I do ban the phrase that ends in hat, or the one that begins with your head up. But asshole is, I don't find it offensive. I think it's quite descriptive. So, anyway, he's coming over tonight to put in molding on the last wall where it didn't have molding, because at least he knows that you lay down the floor tile first and then you put on the molding. And I did the floor tiles. And the whole thing is an extra fiddly problem because the guys who built that add-on, the kitchen is an add-on to a house that didn't have a kitchen originally. It was a cabin for, people who just either worked in the logging camp or came up for the weekend. Anyway, hunters, loggers, miners. Yes, we have mines. So anyway, the walls aren't square. The outside wall of the house appears to be square, but the inside wall on the other side of the kitchen isn't anywhere near to square. It's off by a good 2 inches. So one end, because the handyman guy didn't think about it and lay the tiles down with the paper backing still on them, and start from the wall where people will actually see it. Because he didn't do that, he started from the wall where the cabinets are on top of the floor. I wanted that tiled for extra protection against water damage, because that's what you're supposed to do. But he started from the wall that nobody's going to see and lined them up square on that wall, when he should have lined them up square on the wall where everybody will see it. So there's a gap of 2 inches at one end, but at least that gap will be behind the stove, well, to the side of the stove. I'm debating whether to cut a teeny strip of tile to fit in that gap. And the way the tiles came out, it's less than 2 inches at that end, because down at the other end, I had to strip the edges off of a tile because it was too long to fit properly. Anyway, well, no, he's not the armpit, he's just got OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. But he's not to do that in my house. The test for this evening is when he comes over and sees that I have my kitchen cupboard open. He already fixed it because it wouldn't close before. He fixed it and closed it. Well, I have it open again, and for good reason. The cupboard has developed a smell because the wood got exposed to too much humidity, too much dampness, and it developed an odor. Well, I think I might have ADHD. I do have OCD, but I'm working on it. My OCD is a learned behavior. Anyway, you might notice I'm easily distracted, so that could be ADHD. Anyway, if you leave the cupboard shut, my one last cupboard that's still there, everything else is gone except the sink and that cabinet, which is new. Well, this cupboard has an odor. If you shut the door, the odor gets all over the dishes, especially the plastic dishes. And I don't want to have to throw out all my plastic dishes because the smell won't come out of them. If he tries to shut that cupboard, I'm going to rip him a new one. If he tries to fiddle with the tiles that I laid down on my floor, I'm going to rip him a new one. Meanwhile, I have to finish painting the wall. I finally got, let me show you, because it's way up there and I don't do ladders. It's like 7 or 8 feet tall. The roof is on a slant. The low end is probably 6.5 feet. The high end might be 8 feet. Anyway, let me show you what I finally got. A long handle for the paint roller. My major problem now is going to be how to roll paint onto the wall without having it overlap onto the ceiling. I'm not going to climb up on a ladder and tape it. It's kind of hard to, the usual solution is to use the roller sideways. Well, it's kind of hard to do that when it's way up over your head, but I'll work something out. I would do the ladder if I had a spotter standing at the bottom. Is that, I'm not afraid to get up on the ladder. I'm afraid to climb down because I'm afraid of falling. Well, yeah, the wooden handle I got at Ace Hardware because they don't like plastic. They're Ace Hardware and Lumber. They do have a few plastic things, but they try to avoid them. I love this wooden handle because it can also double as a handle for a garden tool. Uh, if the garden tool has the screw on attachment, and some of them do. Very old school. One handle, multiple tools. Saves space, saves money, etc. Let me put this away. Mm. Oh, look at the kitty. Ah, well, Blackie is here. I don't know if that's his name. He's the neighbor's cat, but he's scarfing up the food that wasn't good enough for my cat. Oh, a wizard staff. I didn't think of that. Well, I was going to eat an Oreo, and I never did. What the hiss? Oh, when did I empty my ashtray? Does this mean I haven't actually smoked a cigarette during this, or am I just spacing out? My ashtray is empty. I don't have clean ashtrays, never. Well, anyway, let's see. It's been close to an hour, and I have stuff to do. And I like Walter Bosley, and I like his books. If you go to Lulu, Lulu, or better yet, go to his website and find links to his books. I'm not sure. I think it's, I've forgotten the name of his website. Um, Come on, Oswald, you know the name of Walter's website. Somethingcontinent.com. Oh, poor Oswald. I have a love-hate relationship with my neti pot. Let me see. Walter Bosley. Um, well, let's see. Ah, oh, Google doesn't seem to know. Yeah, he has an Empire of the Wheel blog. He also has um, Lost Continent Library. That's his publishing company. I think there's a website for that that lists all of his books. Continent Library. Yes, he has a blog, and he also publishes other people's books from time to time. Here we go. He recently published William Michael Mott's classic collection of pulp adventure and fantasy. Well, that's back in print, it says. And there you go. And something else by Michael Mott. Let's see. He spells it like this, I believe, abbreviating William. He's a good author and a Facebook friend, but a good Facebook friend, not just someone who friended me. Um, wow. And empireofthewheel.blogspot.com is also a good one. Anyway, I gotta scoot on out of here. It's been real, and I've jumped all around because I don't want people to tune in for the first 5 minutes and post some awful comment and call me a racist and worse. Although I'm not sure what's worse than a racist. Anyway, um, besides, I gotta keep you updated on my kitchen. And maybe when I get a chance, I'll set up my little laptop on in the kitchen so I can show you the progress. Since my internet connection is semi-portable, that might work. But for today, thank you all for listening. Oh, I got a thumbs up too. It's really nice to. It's always nice to see a thumbs up. And I might pop in later in the week if I can set up the computer to show you the kitchen. We'll see. Now, see, I could have bought all kinds of clothes and books and toys, but instead I bought a kitchen cabinet, a kitchen sink, and faucet and floor tiles. And now I've ordered, see, I have things delivered because I don't drive. I went online and ordered some carpet squares that also glue down so they will cover the vinyl tiles that are not level. And they'll be just thick enough to make that part of the floor level with the rest of it. You too, all of you, be good. Here we go. Let's call it a wrap.